Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for the Amazing Race 38 following episode 7, which was a fine episode. Probably not as strong as some of the other ones that have happened this season, but still led to a pretty fun outcome by the end of it, but we'll get that soon enough. But we have 17 to talk about, and this is more time. Let's go into the video. So starting off at number 7, we have the latest boots from the season, and here we have Natalie and Stephanie, who have a bit of a notable downfall here, where they came into the leg in 4th place, only to be the boots by the end of the episode, which I think is a pretty notable trend there. Now, right off the bat, they didn't get the greatest start, where they were bumped from the first flight to the second flight, despite them technically being ahead of Joseph and Adam, but Joseph and Adam are able to pass them, which by itself didn't matter too much, as there was an equalizer immediately afterwards. But I think the edit set up in a way to where Natalie and Stephanie were probably going to be outplayed by Joseph and Adam, and that things on this leg were not going to go their way. But beyond that, they also get some pretty bad content during the pontoon task, where they talk about how they're opposites and how they balance each other, and how they're the yin-yang sisters, only for them to later get into arguments during the rest of the leg, which is obviously not great there. They also get lost on the way to the detour. And all of this just really causes them to fall behind, to where they were pretty much in the back of the pack from that point on in the rest of the leg here. And they do eventually get last place, despite them actually being 6th place coming into the detour, only for Izzy and Paige to later pass them through them taking the other detour. That does eventually result in their elimination there. So I do find their downfall here to be pretty interesting. Though with that said, I still found them to be on the downward trend from a contender perspective, where while I was somewhat high on them early on this season, I feel like these last few episodes were not the greatest for them. I did bump them down my power ranking the last few weeks. And by the end, even though they were part of this Trainwreck Alliance, I feel like their downfall was something that made sense here. And I'm not too surprised that they ended up not winning by the end of it. So still take all that for what you will, but they're not out of the race to where they're here at number 7. And with that, we have 6 teams left in the race to talk about. As usual, I'm ranking them based on how likely they are to win the race based on their edit and current race position. But at number 6, the team that I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is still Chelsea and Jack. And to me, Chelsea and Jack are still a team who are not coming off the greatest in the edit, where I feel like they haven't gotten as much content as the other teams. And even what they are, they're not being particularly propped up well. And even from a race perspective, they're still not doing particularly great, where it feels like they're just scraping on by. They were 6th place coming into this leg, and they do largely remain around the 5th to 6th place spot from that point forward in the leg. They do eventually pull out a 5th place finish, but even so, I still feel like they're not a team that has really broken out at all, and they're still a team that I'm expecting to be cut along the way, where even though they are managing to scrape on by leg after leg, they're not really impressing me from a performance perspective, and with them also not getting that prominent of an edit, I did decide to leave them behind here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I actually made a change here compared to last week, but at number 5 we do have Kylin and Taylor. Now Kylin and Taylor here didn't have the worst leg in the world, where they did come to the leg in 3rd place, however they do end up falling to 4th place by the end of it, though at the same time they were actually in 2nd place at one point coming into that sheep task, though even so, like, they were roughly around the middle of the pack for the entire leg here. And again, from a performance perspective, I feel like they didn't do the worst in the world. And even from an edit perspective, like, they're getting content here and there. They still have their express pass. They talk about that. And I would expect them to do all right coming to the next leg here. However, I feel like the team above them probably had a slightly better edit while still edging them out in the actual leg here, to where I did decide to leave them behind here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this team has moved up a spot compared to last week, and here we have Joseph and Adam. And I did bump them above Kylin and Taylor for a couple of reasons, where for one, they were ahead of them for pretty much the entire leg, where while they came into the leg in 5th place, they were 1st place coming into the roadblock, and they're able to remain in the top 3 for the rest of the leg there, eventually edging out a 3rd place finish, so that by itself was pretty good. But even from an edit perspective, I feel like they got pretty decent content across this episode here, where they're talking about how they're willing to sacrifice food and sleep in order to get ahead. They're also kind of propped up when they are able to get ahead of Natalie and Stephanie in the flights, being able to bump them to the next flight there. And yes, while Natalie and Stephanie did talk about how, like, this proves that the Alliance is dead, they're ultimately eliminated there. So I feel like it doesn't really blow back too much on Joseph and Ab in particular. So I do feel like at the end of the day, this was probably a slightly better episode for them than it was for Kylin and Taylor. And while I'm probably more confident in the top 3 to actually win the race by the end of it, I feel like it's that distinction that leaves them one spot higher for me. So it's for that reason that they're here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have the same top 3 as last week. And unsurprisingly, the order at number 3 is unchanged. But at number 3, we do have Izzy and Paige, who do have a pretty interesting leg here, where they did come into the leg in last place. And they do spend a decent amount of leg in the back of the pack, where they were actually last place coming into the detour. However, they are able to make a pretty good move by choosing the mass detour, actually being the only team to choose that detour, whereas all the other teams chose the brick detour. And they do get pretty decent personal content where Izzy talks about how like her grandfather like was good at sewing, and so through that she was pretty good at it. And they do get to explain how like they're able to like choose that task, do well enough at it to pass Natalie and Stephanie. And again, I do feel like that is a move that really saves their race, where they are able to edge out Natalie and Stephanie. They're able to survive another leg. And I feel like the edit made it pretty clear that they were going to actually survive by the end of it. Even beyond that, they also got some content earlier on, like where they got to confront Jag and Jazz, like showing them that their plan didn't work, how they're still in the race. So I did find that kind of funny as well. In general, I feel like Izzy and Paige are still a team that, despite them being like in the back of the pack, are still getting pretty favorable content, which I think definitely like edges them way above the likes of Chelsea and Jack, who are probably in a similar game position right now. But I feel like the fact that Izzy and Paige are being presented as more major characters than Chelsea and Jack are major reasons why I still have them relatively high, despite them being in a pretty bad race position right now. So it's for that reason that I had them here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I did decide to remain with the order from last week yet again. So number 2, we do have Jag and Jazz, and this was another pretty decent leg for Jag and Jazz here, where they came into the leg in second place. They finished the leg in second place, where despite them falling behind to fourth place, coming to the roadblock and the sheet task, they are eventually able to jump ahead into the detour, where they're able to blow through that and are able to get their second place finish there. So I do feel like Jag and Jazz are still like doing pretty well from a race perspective. And even from an edit perspective, I still feel like they're pretty major characters on the season. Though similar to my argument from last week, I feel like the reason they're below the number 1 team at least is that I feel like they are starting to show more cracks in their actual performance and in their edit, where you obviously have the Izzy and Paige situation where they're being propped up as major characters despite them being antagonistic towards Jag and Jazz. You have their alliance kind of having a setback here by losing Natalie and Stephanie, and also there being more talk about how they need to run their own race at this point, so even that's starting to falter. You even have Joseph and Adam now talking about how they're willing to play their own race, so I do feel like that aspect is also starting to fall in on them. And just in general, I feel like the number 1 team has also gotten more solid content while being a bit more sheltered despite their performance on the race, to where they decide to leave Jag and Jazz here behind at number 2. And now at number 1, the team I believe is most likely to win the Amazing Race 38 at this point is still Tucker and Eric. And I feel like not much has changed for Tucker and Eric compared to last week, where they end up winning yet again, getting their 4th win in a row, where they didn't really face much opposition either, where they were first place coming into the leg, and they're pretty much in the top 2 the entire time. And from the end of the roadblock, they are pretty clearly in the front of the pack, not really facing too much adversity there. And again, I feel like that is pretty good. But even beyond that, like they've been getting pretty solid content as well, with them talking about how they can't rest on their laurels, how they have to remain focused and keep moving. You even have Tucker talking about how he's bummed that Rubina's gone, but this is a race and he's here to win with his brother, which I feel like is also pretty strong content. And just in general, I feel like they don't have the same flaws as Jag and Jazz, where obviously Jag and Jazz are facing more setbacks now between Izzy and Paige wanting to target them. You also have the likes of Natalie and Stephanie being taken out. I feel like Tucker and Eric are still like getting decent enough content without actually having too much setbacks here. Now, obviously, we'll have to see whether they're able to uphold that, where, for one, you have Kylin and Taylor, Jag and Jazz, both having express passes that they had to use by the end of the next leg here. There's also a potential U-turn that could come up in the future that could also hinder them. So it's not like they're going to face obstacles along the way, but I still feel like they're a team that has been performing pretty well and don't have the same flaws edit-wise as Jag and Jazz, to where I'd still decide to leave them here on number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really has with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so be on the lookout for that. I'm covering Survivor 489 and Hell's Kitchen, so if you want videos on those shows, be on the lookout for that. I'm on Patreon and have a YouTube membership if you want to consider supporting the channel. You can also click the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.